Okay, before we get started, let me go ahead and remind you guys you need to be reading your textbooks and taking your quizzes. The quizzes are open, the textbook is there, and I've given you instructions about the writing assignment, plus there's written instructions online. Do not wait till the last minute to do the writing assignment. It's a complicated read, so don't do it at the last minute. It may not help you. Okay, as we were talking about the New Deal and some of the New Deal programs, one of the first things done right there as soon as inauguration was over was the Emergency Banking Act. Many of the more radical of the Democratic Party at the time believed that Roosevelt wasn't doing enough. As I mentioned earlier, Huey Long had his Share Our Wealth program, that he was going to take the wealth from the top individuals in the country and disseminate it to everybody, more of a wealth redistribution. And so they're disappointed in Roosevelt's actions. However, Roosevelt's accomplishment through this was that the banks never reclose. The banks never reclose, and even though we've got years of the Great Depression left, the banks don't close again. They stay open, and they remain solvent, and they continue functioning. Many critics of Roosevelt's plan says that he actually did nothing except for restore consumer confidence, but in reality, that may have been what was necessary. That may have, the governors had stirred everybody up into a panic, and so this Emergency Banking Act is going to help people have restored confidence in the banking system, so that they can feel confident in putting their money in. The FDIC, this insurance portion, is a good idea that was going to make it so that people, again, could have confidence in the banking system again. Now, on March the 12th, Roosevelt is going to have his first fireside chat. And the purpose is to restore confidence, to give people the idea of complete transparency in the government. My grandmother talked about this to me at one point. She said during this period when she lived in Michigan, people would go to other people's houses and listen to the radio. They would stand outside the windows and listen to the radio as Roosevelt would speak. He would talk about the things we've accomplished, the things we were working on, the things we still have to figure out answers for. And he would say these things, and he would talk to these things. And my grandmother told me it was almost as if he were talking to me. He was talking directly to me. And that's how he did it. I do not believe that he was doing these radio programs seated by a fire. But its design was to help people have confidence in their government again. And as far as my grandmother was concerned, it was working. Also, this notion of the fireside chats where he would tell the country what problems we were still working on would elicit responses from people all over the country. And so they had to increase the size of sort of this White House communications office so that all these people sending cards and letters in to the White House with their ideas about what we can do. Most of those ideas are probably not going to be very good. However, occasionally somebody's going to send in an idea that's actually going to work. And Roosevelt believed that we needed to take every opportunity because everything we've always done before in the past had failed to get us out of the problems. Now, again, part of the Emergency Banking Act was to separate business and personal banking from investment banking. Part of this created something called the Security and Exchange Commission, the SEC. Here in recent days, we've heard a lot about the SECs and safeguards kicking in and stopping trading on the stock market floor for 15 minutes, 30 minutes, because of radical fluctuations. These safeguards that we've been seeing in recent days were implemented as a result of what's going on here, these sort of safeguards that are put into effect during this period. This Security and Exchange Commission is going to license investment dealers, right? It's going to monitor stock transactions, like I said, as we've seen in recent days. It's going to restrict margin buying. It's going to limit how much of the stock market can be purchased on credit. It's also going to make corporations make full disclosure about their actual worth and their output in their companies. And they will be held accountable to those reports that they issue to people. And it's going to make them take responsibility for their, I know that says claims, take responsibility for their claims, but it's supposed to say claims. It's supposed to be, they have to take responsibility for their claims. Now, Roosevelt has to select an individual to be the first head of the Security and Exchange Commission, and his choice for this position is a man named Joseph P. Kennedy. Joseph P. Kennedy. When the press hears that Joseph P. Kennedy is going to be the head of the Security and Exchange Commission, they go ballistic. They say, "What? Are you crazy? The man's a crook. He's a thief." When Roosevelt's questioned about these issues, Roosevelt doesn't. Today, a politician will say, "No, no, no, you don't understand the Joe Kennedy that I know. Honest, hard-working, man of integrity." That's what we would try to do today. We would try to justify the excuse. Roosevelt, when asked why he would put the fox guarding the hen house, Roosevelt said, "If you want to catch a thief, you have to set a thief after him." Roosevelt wasn't making any claims about what he believed the virtue of Joseph P. Kennedy. He said, "I know who Joseph P. Kennedy is. That's why I know he can catch the people who are ripping off the stock market." And so he takes the job. What happens? In his first year, Richard Whitney, the president of the New York Stock Exchange, is arrested and put in jail because during this turmoil, during the downturn, he was skimming off of other people's stock market portfolios to cover his bad investments. Now, the idea would have been that once the stock market rebounded, he would put all that money back once his bad investments were covered. But Kennedy was able to catch him in advance before he was able to put the money back. Now, why would Joe Kennedy know to do that kind of thing? Possibly because Joe Kennedy had done that kind of thing before. When Roosevelt goes to the London conference, this London conference is a discussion. How are we going to deal with the nations, with the debt, the worldwide debt? Because the United States is not the only country going through a depression. It's also England and France, all of the liberal democracies in the world. There's only two groups in the world by the time Roosevelt comes to power. There's only two groups in the world who are not currently in a Great Depression. The first group are the fascist states in Europe, Germany and Italy. These states are out of their Great Depression under the leadership of Adolf Hitler and under the leadership of Benito Mussolini. So these countries are no longer in their depression, and the other country that's no longer in the Great Depression is the Soviets, which now the Soviet Union, being led by Stalin. The reports of their glorious 5-year plans and how much prosperity is happening is becoming the envy of the world. We will later find out that they've been cooking the books and things. But the idea of these liberal democracies is they all come together with one goal. Their goal is to wipe the slate clean so that nobody owes anybody anything anymore. Well, when Roosevelt gets there, basically he says, "Hold up, you all owe us. And so by wiping the slate clean, you're just going to cause the people in America to pay for your whole World War One. Roosevelt leaves the London conference refusing to wipe the slates clean. And when he gets home, the first thing Roosevelt does is he takes our country off the gold standard. We will go on a full-blown Federal Reserve standard to run our economy and to attempt to maintain control of the economy. During this period, the New Deal will create a whole bunch of agencies. The press will refer to it as the alphabet soup. Roosevelt is cooking up an alphabet soup. The reason they do that is because of all the initials, all the acronyms, right? The Federal Emergency Relief Administration becomes FERA. This is the first sort of blanket organization that's created. It's under the leadership of Harry Hopkins. It's supposed to provide relief, immediate relief for unemployed, landless, disabled, people too old to work, people too young to work. It's supposed to help so that Americans would not go hungry, Americans would not be homeless. It supported 4 to 5 million households during this period. Thousands of public works projects will be initiated through this. Immunizations and vaccinations will start going through the country. We'll start vaccinating all the kids in the country. And it also is going to start producing flood protection, building dams so that we can control these torrential rivers when the weather turns bad. And also literacy classes. After Harry Hopkins has his first year at the head of this program, he comes to Congress to ask for money, and he had spent billions of dollars. And this is, again, 1930s money. He had spent billions of dollars. And the Congress was going nuts. The Congress was going nuts over having to allocate that much money. And so the idea was, let's take all of the things that FERA does and divide it up into smaller organizations. Hence the notion of these, the alphabet soup, all of the smaller groups. Now there's lots of them. The NRA, not the NRA that we have today, but the National Recovery Administration. We have the Rural Electrification Administration. We have all kinds of other, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, and all these other agencies that are created that deal with one specific topic, one specific item. Two that we're going to mention are probably the most successful and the most talked about, the most popular. The first is called the Civilian Conservation Corps, and the second is the Tennessee Valley Authority. The Civilian Conservation Corps and the Tennessee Valley Authority. Now, I've posted on the D2L page an introduction to the Dust Bowl. It's about a 5-minute YouTube video. I want you to watch that just to get a glimpse of some of the stuff. If you would like to, I would recommend that you get on YouTube and look up the Ken Burns videos so that you can watch. There's a lengthy 4-part documentary that Ken Burns had done with a couple of other people, and then interviewing people who actually lived through the Dust Bowl. And so it's beneficial for you to see those things. This is what's going to happen with the Dust Bowl, and it kind of shows, it demonstrates sort of the 3 R's of the New Deal: the relief and the recovery and the reform. Okay, in all of these areas. The Civilian Conservation Corps is conservation and jobs. It's to go out west to work on this Dust Bowl, this terrible, terrible area, especially this area in Oklahoma right through here. That's roughly what they call no man's land, where the worst part of the wind erosion is. They would recruit in the east, in the big cities, New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, Detroit. They would recruit in these large cities and recruit young men, usually between between 18 and 30. They would recruit these young men and take them out west to do conservation work, and they would pay them $30 a month. Now, when they got out there, right, they would be given room and board, they would be housed, they would be fed, and they would be given all their work clothes. And so what they would do is they would take $25 and send it back home to their families, and $5 would stay with them, so they can buy incidentals and do things like that. Okay. Primarily, their focus was to plant forests to help stem erosion. Much of the problem with the Dust Bowl is a result of over farming, cutting up all the sod that would hold the topsoil in place during the drought cycle. We've talked about this region of the country being this area of a drought cycle. What they're going to do is they're going to plant forests from Canada all the way to Mexico, sort of this line of trees to provide a wind break that's going to actually, it's supposed to disrupt the wind, right? They're also going to educate the farmers as to how better ways to plow their fields so that wind erosion doesn't have as much impact on their fields once they learn how to contour plow through these areas. Okay, they're also going to try to tame the rivers with dams, and they're even going to hang telephone wires. 83,000 miles of telephone wires are going to crisscross this region and try to connect people. And they're going to build roads, 122,000 miles of roads, again, to bring connections for all these people. They will dig wells. 23,000 new water sources will be discovered by these guys out here in this region. What we do find out, though, out of those 23,000 new water sources, the majority of them are from the same aquifer. They literally just have to dig so far down that they tap into sort of this aquifer underneath the continent. So, what is it that the Civilian Conservation Corps does? Well, number one, it is directly providing relief for this area, right? It's directly providing relief for this area. But it's also providing relief to the big cities. Because when these young men are sent out west to work, it eases the unemployment situation in those cities. So the older men who live in those cities can actually, it'll be easier for them to find jobs. When these young men make their $30 a month, $25 gets sent back home to provide for their families back home. And so it starts business and commerce back in the cities again. The Civilian Conservation Corps does a lot. And it's not just in the Dust Bowl. It's not just in the Dust Bowl. There was even some CCC projects that were done around this area. Now, the next one is the one that we are more familiar with in this region. It's called the Tennessee Valley Authority. The Tennessee Valley Authority is an area that builds dams. They come in to build dams. What the idea was, when they started looking at this attempt to thwart the damaging ravages of floodwaters, they looked at the country. Where in the country is it most damaged as a result of floodwaters? And almost unanimously, it was said the Tennessee River. It's the Tennessee Valley. All these rivers and the subsidiaries who come through and then come back up and dump into the Mississippi. Whenever there's torrential rains coming down, you have terrible flash floods. My wife and I wrote a book about Old Butler, which was a city during this period which was actually would wind up being flooded as a result of building these dams. Every 10 years or so, the floods would be so bad that it would wipe away houses, people would die, and it was terrible, terrible loss to businesses, loss of lives, and things like that. So when the Tennessee Valley Authority was established, it was designed, number one, to try to control the raging rivers And so the series of dams you see on the map, all of the little dams that have been built, this map also includes all of the modern power plants that have been added to this area. When these dams were built, the primary purpose was to alleviate the suffering caused by the destruction in these dams. A secondary benefit was that each one of these dams produced an enormous reservoir of water, because these are rivers that flow constantly. And so as these rivers flow, this enormous reservoir is created. They're able to put hydroelectric dams. And so the Rural Electrification Administration is going to be able to start electrifying this whole region. And so with all the dams and with all the electrification, now to this day, even at this point in Tennessee's history, the tertiary benefit of these things is it creates a number of lakes. People come from all over the world to fish and to swim and to boat in the lakes that are created on the Tennessee River. I think the only natural lake that was ever in Tennessee was one called Crater Lake, and it was created because of some kind of meteorite that caused the lake. So all of these programs are part of the New Deal. All these programs were part of the New Deal. Now, coming out of the New Deal also are other programs like the Social Security Administration and the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, the WPA, which actually tries to put all kinds of people to work. For example, many of the early Shirley Temple movies are actually WPA movies. They basically, the government is paying people to go and do their jobs. Now, many of these, as you're going to find as you read in your text, many of these New Deal programs are going to start to be challenged by the Supreme Court. This is going to be upsetting to Roosevelt. And by 1936, he's fairly upset with the fact that a lot of his New Deal proposals have been struck down by the Supreme Court. Now, this leads to one of the worst parts of Roosevelt's administration. It's sort of the court packing scandal. I want you to read in your text about the court packing scandal, how he was going to try to fill the Supreme Court with individuals who would not strike down his New Deal programs. Continue to read that. There's also, your text doesn't deal with it a lot, one of the first measures that Roosevelt approves of when he gets into office is the repealing of the 18th Amendment, which was that prohibition against alcohol. In this region, a number of the newspapers in the area are going to editorialize, even though they had supported Roosevelt with the creation of the TVA and all these things. When he champions the idea of getting rid of repealing the amendment to cause prohibition, he makes a lot of enemies out of his own party. Okay, so continue to read your chapters. Please take your quizzes. I am going to try to do this for at least one more chapter, and we'll find out if this is going to be the model that's going to work for us for the rest of the semester. You guys make good choices and try to be safe, and quarantine, self-quarantine in place.